Think your morning commute is rough? Your ancestors from just 1,000 years ago would laugh at what you consider hardship. Let's imagine you've been transported to a coastal Viking settlement circa 850 CE. Your survival clock starts now. You awaken before dawn in a smoke-filled longhouse on a straw-filled sack crawling with fleas and lice, already feasting on your skin. The temperature hovers just above freezing as the hearth fire died down hours ago. Your only climate control, layers of rough-spun wool that feels like sandpaper. That persistent itch is just the beginning of what could become infected sores without proper treatment. But here's the part no one saw coming. Your morning routine doesn't involve scrolling through social media. There's no bathroom to stumble into, no hot shower to wash away your grogginess. Instead, you'd venture outside in pre-dawn darkness to relieve yourself in a designated area that's uncomfortably close to living quarters. Toilet paper? Non-existent. Think moss, leaves, or smooth stones instead. And that minty fresh feeling would be replaced with scraping your teeth using a frayed twig, maybe with some abrasive ashes if you're fancy. Your mouth would still taste foul because, bacterially speaking, it probably is. Breakfast offers no comfort either, just a bowl of reheated barley gruel, perhaps with bits of intensely salty preserved fish. The water looks suspicious, teeming with microorganisms your pampered immune system has never met. One sip could mean dysentery within hours. Even the morning ale, safer than water, would taste sour and flat to your modern palate. By now your body is in revolt, caffeine withdrawal headaches pounding, stomach questioning your choices, joints aching from your medieval sleeping arrangement. But there's no calling in sick in Viking society. No paid time off. Unless you're physically incapacitated, you work. Morning labour won't involve emails or meetings, but back-breaking physical tasks. Chopping wood, hauling water, tending animals, or agricultural work that would leave your soft hands blistered before midday. And if you think that's bad, just wait. All this assumes your settlement isn't under attack. Vikings lived where violence wasn't a distant threat, but everyday reality. The morning calm could shatter instantly with approaching enemies, leaving seconds to react in a world where combat wasn't optional, but essential. Your knowledge of spreadsheets won't help you wield an axe against someone who's been training since childhood. In Viking times, being unprepared for violence wasn't just a disadvantage, it was a death sentence. You've made it to midday, your modern muscles screaming in protest from the morning's labour. Now comes what should be a relief, mealtime. But if you're anticipating a comforting lunch break, you're in for another brutal awakening. Viking sustenance was about survival, not satisfaction, and the distance between their food practices and your local bistro spans more than just centuries. The midday meal, if you're fortunate, consists of more of that morning gruel, though perhaps with additions that would make your modern stomach turn. Imagine biting into bread so coarse and gritty it wears down your teeth with every chew. The grain wasn't just minimally processed, it often contained particles of millstone. That strange tang, not artisanal sourdough culture, but the early stages of mold that couldn't be wasted in a society where starvation loomed every winter. The meat, when available, wouldn't be the neatly trimmed portions from your grocery store, but tough, stringy cuts from animals that lived hard lives, often preserved through smoking or brining to a saltiness that would make your blood pressure skyrocket. If you're squeamish about looking your dinner in the eye, Viking cuisine would be your personal nightmare. Nothing, absolutely nothing, goes to waste. Blood collected from slaughtered animals becomes the base for black pudding. Organs that modern Americans discard are prized delicacies. That stew bubbling in the pot might contain sheep's head, complete with eyes that are considered particularly nutritious. And let's not even discuss what passes for sausage casings. Your modern sensibilities about food would mark you as wasteful at best, possibly insulting to your hosts at worst. You're probably wondering how anyone could possibly stay properly nourished on such fare. The truth is, many didn't. Seasonal vitamin deficiencies were common, especially in winter and spring when fresh produce was non-existent. Scurvy, with its bleeding gums and reopening of old wounds, was a regular visitor to Viking communities before spring greens emerged. That slightly nauseating fermented fish you're being offered, it's not just a delicacy, it's survival, providing precious nutrients during the barren months when fresh food is impossible to find. Your reluctance to eat it might be the difference between life and death when winter stretches longer than expected. And then there's the constant uncertainty. Modern humans have forgotten what true food insecurity feels like. Your Viking hosts live with the knowledge that one bad harvest, one cattle disease, one lengthy storm preventing fishing vessels from launching could mean starvation for the entire community. The food storage areas aren't just conveniences, they're survival chambers, carefully managed and fiercely protected. That anxiety about food sufficiency permeates every aspect of Viking life, creating a relationship with sustenance entirely foreign to your supermarket psychology. In their world, the luxury of being a picky eater doesn't exist. Unless you're among the settlement's elite, portions are determined by your value to the community. That scrawny kid getting a larger share than you, he's the blacksmith's apprentice, essential to the community's survival. Your modern indignation about fairness in food distribution would be met with blank stares or outright hostility. In Viking society, your worth is measured in practical contribution, not abstract notions of equality. And if food becomes truly scarce, those deemed least valuable eat last, if at all. If you've managed to choke down enough unfamiliar food to keep moving, your survival clock continues ticking into the afternoon. But in Viking society, the greatest threat to your continued existence isn't the food or the working conditions. It's other humans. The popular image of Vikings as warriors isn't just historical stereotyping. It reflects a fundamental truth about their world where violence wasn't an aberration, but a constant companion. Let's be uncomfortably honest. You, the modern human, have probably never experienced true violence. Maybe you've seen a bar fight or witnessed a heated argument, but the visceral life or death combat that was commonplace in Viking society, that's as foreign to you as smartphones would be to them. From childhood, Vikings were conditioned not just to accept violence, but to excel at it. Boys as young as 12 trained with weapons daily, not as sport, but as essential life preparation. That teenager carrying an axe isn't playing at being an adult. He's already expected to defend the settlement if raiders appear on the horizon. And those raiders weren't rare occurrences, but a persistent reality. Coastal settlements lived in perpetual readiness for attack, not just from rival Viking groups, but from anyone with a boat and desperation or greed as motivation. The concept of peace as we understand it, the default state occasionally interrupted by conflict, would be reversed in Viking consciousness. Potential conflict was the default, with periods of relative calm as the welcome exception. Your modern instinct to flee from danger rather than toward it would mark you as a liability in a world where every able body was expected to grab a weapon when the alarm sounded. But you know what's worse than the external threats? The internal ones. That seemingly friendly Viking who shared his ale with you this morning. He's measuring your worth, your weakness, your potential usefulness. Disputes between community members weren't settled through passive-aggressive emails or HR interventions, but through direct confrontation, often escalating to holmgang, a form of regulated duel used to settle everything from property disputes to insults. Your modern conflict avoidance strategies would be interpreted as weakness, making you a target rather than keeping you safe. That's if you're a man. If you're a woman, different but equally brutal rules apply. While Viking women had more rights than many of their contemporaries in other societies, physical strength and willingness to use violence remained cultural currencies. Female Vikings needed to defend themselves and their property when men were away raiding, creating a society where even women possessed combat skills that would humble most modern men. Your inability to wield a shield or knife with confidence would make you vulnerable regardless of your gender. Even social gatherings contain potential death sentences for the unwary modern human. Those drinking horns being passed around the evening fire aren't filled with light beer, but potent mead or ale, consumed in quantities that would incapacitate the untrained modern liver. Yet maintaining awareness remains essential, because intoxication doesn't excuse you from the complex social rules governing honor and insult. One misinterpreted comment, one cultural faux pas, and you could find yourself facing a very sober Viking demanding satisfaction for an offense you didn't even realize you committed, and refusing such a challenge. That's not avoiding conflict. It's guaranteeing your status as a social outcast, denied the community protection that stands between survival and death. If you've survived the violence and managed not to fatally offend anyone, you're now facing the microscopic world of disease and infection that decimated pre-modern populations. Vikings lacked not just antibiotics, but the entire framework of germ theory that protects you daily. That small cut from afternoon chores. In your world, it's a minor inconvenience. In Viking Norway, it's potentially fatal. Without antibiotics, even tiny injuries frequently developed into life-threatening infections. The reddening skin around that cut isn't just inflammation. It's possibly the beginning of blood poisoning that can kill within days. Viking herbal treatments against serious infection were like fighting forest fires with water pistols. The sanitation situation is equally dire. Viking settlements had designated waste areas, but nothing approaching modern standards. Human and animal waste accumulated near living spaces, creating perfect breeding grounds for parasites and disease. Those stomach cramps might be from intestinal worms that would constitute a public health emergency today. Treatment? More suspicious ale while your body fights a battle it's never trained for. Despite stereotypes of filthy barbarians, Vikings actually valued cleanliness more than many European contemporaries. Cold comfort, considering what that meant. Your communal bath would involve sharing water with multiple family members, perhaps with herbs for scent rather than sanitization. And that throbbing toothache? Dental care consisted primarily of extraction without anesthesia, using tools more suited to a torture chamber. Healing fell to the community's wise women or men, whose treatments blended practical herbalism with rituals that would seem entirely superstitious today. Question this approach, and you're rejecting the cosmological framework ordering their world. By nightfall, new symptoms emerge from your Viking day. Smoke from the hearth has left your eyes irritated, your lungs burning with each breath. The unfamiliar bacterial environment has your stomach churning and skin breaking out in mysterious rashes. Your blistered hands already show signs of infection. In your time, each condition warrants medical attention. Here, they're simply baseline existence, unremarkable to anyone but you. As darkness falls on your first, possibly last day in Viking society, you confront perhaps the most relentless opponent, the Nordic environment itself. These people survived not because their environment was forgiving, but because they possessed generations of knowledge that you entirely lack. In Scandinavian winter, your situation would be immediately dire. Modern humans experience cold by choice and in controlled doses. Vikings experienced it as an existential threat requiring constant management. The evening temperature isn't just uncomfortable, it's dangerous. Your body, accustomed to central heating and technical fabrics, can't regulate temperature efficiently here. That uncontrollable shivering, it's the first stage of hypothermia. Your provided clothing, rough wool and animal skins, is drastically different from anything you've worn. The wool retains warmth even when wet, crucial in damp Nordic climate, but irritates skin accustomed to cotton. Those drafty seams aren't manufacturing defects, but the limits of hand stitching. Your constant fidgeting marks you as someone lacking the mental discipline to accept physical discomfort as default. Even in summer, you'd face different but equally challenging conditions. Extended northern daylight would disrupt your circadian rhythms, causing sleep deprivation. The sudden insect profusion would introduce pathogens your body has never encountered. Those picturesque landscapes, filled with hazards requiring experienced navigation, your city-trained eyes would miss crucial environmental indicators that Viking children recognize instinctively. Summer also means brutal work schedules that your 40-hour workweek body isn't prepared for. Vikings worked until daylight or the task was exhausted, up to 16-hour days of continuous physical labor. Your concept of work-life balance would be incomprehensible in a society where survival required maximizing every productive moment. The resulting exhaustion would impact your cognitive function, making errors likely precisely when they could be fatal. As night falls, environmental challenges transform rather than diminish. The seemingly sturdy longhouse reveals its vulnerabilities. Wind finds every construction gap. The necessary smoke hole allows in precipitation. The fire creates heat zones, requiring knowledge of optimal sleeping positions you lack. And the darkness is complete in a way few modern humans ever experience, filled with sounds your urban-trained ears cannot properly interpret. As your first Viking day ends, you face perhaps the most subtle yet inescapable challenge, navigating a social structure operating on entirely foreign principles. Vikings didn't just live differently, they thought differently, valuing concepts that would bewilder modern sensibilities. Your life in a society that at least honors equality, theoretical social mobility, and individual rights would clash with Viking reality. Their world operated on a rigid hierarchy where worth came from birth, strength, and practical contribution, not education or credentials. Your degree, worthless. Your personal brand, meaningless. Your assets back home, non-existent. In one day, you've fallen from whatever status you held to the absolute bottom. A useless outsider with no family connections, no demonstrable skills, and no survival knowledge. The depth of this reset is profound. In Viking society, slaves were property, not people. Without demonstrating immediate value, you'd be somewhere between tolerated burden and potential thrall. That Viking who showed basic kindness, it might have been assessing your market value if you need to be sold to another settlement. Gender roles would further shock your sensibilities. While Viking women had more rights than many contemporaries, clear labor divisions existed. Men showing interest in female tasks faced ridicule. Women who couldn't efficiently manage household production were failing their core social function. Your awkward attempts at gender-appropriate activities would mark you as deficient, regardless of your sex. Even casual interactions are minefields. Viking communication valued directness over diplomacy, unlike your workplace politeness. Your constructive feedback would seem weak and evasive. Your respectful disagreement would read as confusion or cowardice, and humor to diffuse tension. Comedy doesn't translate across millennia, and your clever reference might be taken as a grave insult. Religious views present perhaps the most dangerous territory. Viking spirituality wasn't optional, but a fundamental framework explaining everything from weather to illness. Religious rituals weren't cultural activities, but essential functions ensuring divine favor. Your reluctance to participate wouldn't be respected as personal choice, but condemned as endangering the settlement's relationship with survival-controlling forces. By the time you return to your flea-infested pallet, your social isolation becomes clear. You lack not just physical skills, but the entire cultural framework for functioning in this society. The subtle cues and shared references you navigate effortlessly at home are replaced by equally complex but different ones everyone else understands instinctively. In a world where communal support isn't just socially desirable but essential for survival, being the perpetual outsider isn't just lonely, it's potentially fatal. The painful truth is this: you wouldn't last 24 hours in Viking times because survival then required an entirely different skill set than modern life has given you. From the moment you woke on that uncomfortable straw mattress to your final exhausted collapse at night's end, Every aspect of Viking existence would be testing capabilities you've never developed. Yet somehow, these fierce northerners not only survived, but thrived in conditions that would break most of us within a single day. Darkness falls across the Norse settlement. The air grows thick with tension as the first howl pierces the winter silence. Not the mournful cry of a lone wolf, but the coordinated chorus of an entire pack. For the Vikings, this wasn't just another threat. It was a deadly game of survival that shaped their entire civilization. In modern times, our encounters with wolves are rare and usually from the safety of controlled environments. But for the Vikings, wolves represented an ever-present shadow that loomed over their daily lives, testing their courage, ingenuity, and will to survive. While we often picture Vikings as fearless raiders crossing treacherous seas, some of their most harrowing battles were fought not on distant shores, but right at their doorstep, against one of nature's most efficient predators. Archaeological evidence suggests that during the height of the Viking Age, wolf populations in Scandinavia were up to 20 times denser than today's numbers. A single Norse settlement could face up to 30 wolf encounters in a harsh winter month, each one a potential death sentence for anyone caught unprepared. The relationship between Vikings and wolves was far more complex than simple predator versus prey. During the Viking Age, 793 to 1066 CE, Scandinavia's forests teemed with grey wolves in numbers that would stagger modern wildlife experts. These weren't just occasional encounters, they were an existential threat that shaped every aspect of Norse life. What made the situation particularly deadly was the perfect storm of environmental and social conditions. Viking settlements, with their livestock and food stores, created irresistible attractions for wolf packs struggling through the brutal Nordic winters. As Vikings pushed further into the wilderness to establish new settlements, they essentially placed themselves directly in wolf territory. The predators, already adapted to the harsh climate, found these human outposts to be perfect hunting grounds. The wolves of Viking Age Scandinavia were also notably larger than their modern counterparts. Skeletal remains from the period suggest adults could reach weights of up to 175 pounds or 79 kilograms, a size that made them more than capable of taking down even the most seasoned warrior. During the depths of winter, when food became scarce, these wolves would form larger packs than typically seen today, sometimes numbering 20 or more animals. The cultural and psychological impact of wolves in Norse mythology was significant. In Norse mythology, wolves were depicted as powerful symbols of chaos and destruction. The great wolf Fenrir was said to be destined to devour Odin during Ragnarok, while his offspring, Skjold and Hati, were described as chasing the sun and moon across the sky. These stories reflected the very real fear of wolves that Vikings experienced as they navigated the dangers of their environment. Archaeological evidence tells us that nearly every Viking settlement had its share of wolf-related casualties. Grave sites from the period reveal distinctive bite marks on bones, and settlement records speak of entire families lost to wolf attacks during particularly harsh winters. The problem was so severe that many Norse communities had dedicated wolf watchers, individuals whose sole responsibility was to monitor wolf activity and warn of impending attacks. When survival meant the difference between a quick reaction or becoming part of the pack's next meal, Vikings developed a sophisticated array of defensive measures that would impress even modern military strategists. The Vikings' approach to wolf defense was methodical and multi-layered, born from generations of brutal experience. At the heart of their defensive strategy was the concept of ring defense, a system where settlements were arranged in concentric circles of protection. The outermost ring consisted of cleared land, stripped of underbrush and trees that wolves might use for cover. Within this, they constructed what modern archaeologists call wolf ditches, deep trenches filled with sharpened stakes that would impede charging wolves and potentially injure them. But perhaps their most ingenious innovation was the wolf bell system, a network of bronze bells positioned at strategic points around the settlement, connected by ropes. These weren't just simple alarms. They were carefully calibrated to produce specific tones that could communicate the direction and severity of an approaching threat. A single wolf might trigger a different signal than a pack, allowing defenders to respond appropriately. The Vikings also developed specialized weapons for wolf encounters. The Ulfbert sword, while famous for its quality, was actually poorly suited for wolf defense. Instead, they favored the wolf spear, a shorter, thicker spear with a crossguard that prevented an impaled wolf from sliding down the shaft to attack the wielder. Fear the wolf that walks alone, but terror the pack that hunts as one. Old Norse proverb. The psychological dimension of surviving wolf attacks was as crucial as any physical preparation. Vikings developed a complex mental framework for dealing with the constant threat, one that merged practical survival skills with their deeply held spiritual beliefs. Young Vikings were trained from childhood to recognize different types of wolf behavior. They learned to distinguish between the hunting patterns of lone wolves and packs, to read tracks in various weather conditions, and most importantly, to master their own fear. This wasn't just about bravery. It was about developing what modern psychologists might call tactical awareness. The training was intensely practical. Mock wolf attacks were staged during different seasons and weather conditions. Children were taught to recognize the subtle signs of wolf presence, changes in bird calls, unusual livestock behavior, and the distinct patterns of wolf tracks. But beyond these practical skills, there was a deeper psychological preparation at work. Vikings believed that showing fear would attract wolves, a belief that, while not entirely accurate by modern understanding, served an important psychological purpose. It encouraged warriors and civilians alike to maintain composure during encounters, which often proved crucial for survival. They developed specific breathing techniques passed down through generations, designed to calm the mind during wolf encounters. Norse spiritual beliefs played a crucial role in shaping perspectives on fear and bravery. Wolves were portrayed as agents of chaos, and facing them was considered a test of strength and courage. According to these beliefs, warriors who died fighting wolves were thought to earn a place in Valhalla, an honor equal to dying in battle. This belief system reframed fear as a spiritual challenge rather than a source of paralysis. Interestingly, archaeological evidence suggests that Vikings used what we might now call exposure therapy. They would keep wolf cubs captured during spring raids, raising them to adulthood. While these wolves never became fully domesticated, they helped younger Vikings become accustomed to wolf presence and behavior, making actual encounters less psychologically overwhelming. A wolf at the throat is worth two in the woods, Viking battle saying, emphasizing the importance of dealing with immediate threats first. When facing a wolf pack, Vikings employed battle tactics that demonstrated their deep understanding of both predator and prey. Their most effective formation, known as the shield spine, emerged from generations of brutal experience. Unlike the famous shield wall used against human opponents, warriors would form a tight triangle, backs to each other, with shields angled downward. This precise positioning protected against wolves' natural instinct to lunge for the throat, while simultaneously guarding against their secondary attacks at the legs. Through centuries of encounters, Vikings had learned to read the complex language of pack attacks. They recognized the subtle difference between a testing strike, where a single wolf would probe their defenses, and the more deadly split force attacks, where packs would coordinate from multiple angles. Most feared was the rush down, a full frontal assault by the entire pack that could overwhelm even the most seasoned warriors. One of their most daring strategies was known as the blood bait gambit. This high-risk tactic involved deliberately wounding one wolf, knowing that the scent of blood would often cause the pack to turn on their injured member. While dangerous, this strategy bought crucial time for defenders to either retreat to safety or mount a more effective defense. Viking wolf defense units operated with remarkable coordination. Each warrior played a specific role, with the most experienced fighters serving as backers, maintaining constant verbal updates about wolf positions to defenders who couldn't turn to look. The most agile warriors, known as springers, would make quick strikes to disrupt coordinated pack attacks, preventing wolves from establishing their preferred attack patterns. The Vikings' technological response to wolf threats revealed an innovative spirit that went far beyond simple weapons and barriers. Their developments transformed entire settlements into sophisticated defense systems, incorporating generations of hard-won knowledge about their perpetual adversary. Among their most remarkable innovations was specialized wolf armor, a sophisticated modification to standard Viking combat gear. Recent archaeological discoveries have unveiled leather armor reinforced with angled wooden splints at the neck and legs, precisely positioned to deflect wolf bites. More fascinating still were the wolf spikes, carefully crafted rows of hardened iron points attached to leather jerkins. These weren't placed randomly, but designed specifically to injure wolves during their preferred attack pattern of leaping onto prey from behind. Viking settlements themselves evolved into masterworks of defensive architecture. Their walls weren't simply vertical barriers, but featured outward sloping surfaces that wolves found impossible to climb. The layout of buildings created natural sound channels that amplified the noise of approaching predators, while seemingly innocent dead ends could become deadly traps for pursuing wolves. The true genius of Viking innovation appeared in their early warning systems. They created intricate networks of tripwires connected to hollow logs filled with stones, a primitive but remarkably effective alarm system. Different types of wood were burned to create distinct smoke signals, allowing settlements to communicate specific information about wolf pack movements across vast distances. Most impressive was their wolf pit system. Not simple holes in the ground, but carefully engineered mechanisms using counterweights and triggers. These sophisticated traps could capture wolves alive, enabling Vikings to study their behavior and continuously improve their defensive strategies. In every Viking heart beats the echo of ancient howls, modern Norse saying. The centuries-long battle between Vikings and wolves left an indelible mark on Norse culture that resonates even today. What began as a desperate struggle for survival evolved into a complex relationship that shaped everything from their architectural practices to their spiritual beliefs, leaving behind a legacy that continues to influence modern Scandinavian culture. Encounters with wolves left a lasting mark on Viking culture, influencing their mythology and folklore. The great wolf Fenrir, a central figure in Norse myths, symbolized the dangers that lurked in their forests. Despite this fear, Vikings also developed a sense of respect for wolves. Archaeological evidence from burial sites reveals wolf pelts treated with notable care, often placed alongside the remains of warriors. These were not merely trophies, but may have signified the wolf's perceived role in Viking identity and beliefs. Perhaps most significantly, the Viking experience with wolves helped shape what would become the distinctive Scandinavian approach to coexisting with nature. Unlike many other cultures that sought to eliminate wolves entirely, the Vikings developed a more nuanced relationship with these predators. This balanced perspective, respecting nature's dangers while learning to live alongside them, became deeply embedded in Nordic culture. It's reflected today in Scandinavia's progressive environmental policies and their leading role in wolf conservation efforts. The legacy of Viking wolf encounters extends even into modern military and survival training. The Norwegian Armed Forces Winter Warfare School still teaches several principles derived from Viking wolf defense strategies, particularly regarding group formation in predator-rich territories. Similarly, contemporary wilderness survival courses in Scandinavia often reference Viking techniques for predator awareness and defensive positioning. The howl of the wolf may no longer strike terror into Norse hearts, but its echo still resonates through Scandinavian culture, architecture, and environmental philosophy. And speaking of survival in the harsh north, have you ever wondered how Viking peasants endured the harsh winters without the luxuries of modern heating? Their resilience, resourcefulness, and sheer grit were the difference between life and death.
Think your winter is brutal? While you're curled up with hot chocolate and the thermostat humming at 72 degrees Fahrenheit, Viking peasants braced for a Scandinavian deep freeze armed with nothing but wool, firewood, and sheer survival instinct. Every autumn was a race against death. One mistake in their preparations meant starvation, frostbite, or worse. No second chances, no safety nets. Just months of brutal labor, communal survival, and wisdom forged through generations of hardship. Compared to their world, scraping ice off your windshield is child's play. So how did they outlast the deadliest season with nothing but grit and ancient know-how? The first thing that struck Viking peasants wasn't the cold, it was the darkness. In central Scandinavia, winter days shrank to a mere 4 to 6 hours of pale, watery sunlight. Imagine spending 18 to 20 hours in near-total darkness, where every task, from feeding livestock to collecting firewood, had to be accomplished in a narrow window of twilight. For context, that's like trying to complete all your daily activities during an extended lunch break. But the darkness was just the opening act. Winter temperatures in Viking Age Scandinavia regularly plunged to minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 29 degrees Celsius, with coastal regions facing the added bite of wind chill and maritime storms. To put this in perspective, that's cold enough to freeze exposed skin in under 30 minutes, about the same temperature as the inside of your home freezer. Modern weather stations in these regions still record similar temperatures, but we face them with Gore-Tex and central heating, not homespun wool and wooden walls. The winter presented 3 lethal challenges that every Viking household had to overcome. First was the cold itself, an invisible predator that could kill through hypothermia or frostbite. Without reliable shelter and heating, death could come in a single night of exposure. Second was starvation. Unlike our modern world of 24/7 supermarkets, Vikings faced months where growing food was impossible. Their autumn preparations needed to be perfect, or spring would find their households decimated by hunger. Third was isolation. Winter storms could cut off Viking communities for weeks at a time. A family that ran out of food or fuel couldn't simply trek to the nearest village for supplies. Attempting such a journey in a blizzard was often a death sentence. For Viking peasants, surviving winter wasn't just about enduring the cold, it was about preparing for a siege by nature itself. Every autumn became a race against time to gather enough resources to survive nature's harshest season. Their solutions to these challenges weren't just clever, they were essential blueprints for survival that would be passed down through generations. If you've ever had your power go out and worried about the food in your freezer, you've had a tiny taste of what Viking peasants faced every year. But while we panic about a few days of food storage, they had to preserve enough food to feed entire families and their livestock for up to 6 months. Their solutions weren't just effective, they were ingenious combinations of chemistry and careful timing that we still use today. The preservation process began long before the first frost. By late summer, Viking households launched into a carefully choreographed dance of food preservation that would make modern preppers look like amateurs. Every edible item had its own preservation method, perfected through generations of trial and error. Meat preservation was perhaps their most sophisticated achievement. Without refrigeration, Vikings developed a multi-layered approach that would seem almost alchemical to modern eyes. Fish and meat were first dried in the cold autumn air, then smoked using specific types of wood. A typical Viking household would smoke enough meat to fill a modern walk-in closet, roughly 600 to 800 pounds or 270 to 360 kilos for a family of 6. The smoking process wasn't just about preservation. It created a protective outer layer that sealed in nutrients while keeping out bacteria. But their most fascinating preservation method was fermentation. Take skyr, for instance, a dairy product that's currently trending in high-end grocery stores, but was a Viking survival staple. By carefully controlling bacterial fermentation, they created a protein-rich food that could last months without refrigeration. Modern food scientists have found that traditional skyr contains beneficial probiotics that actually strengthen the immune system, something those Viking peasants seemed to know intuitively. The real masterpiece of Viking food preservation was their root cellar system. These weren't just holes in the ground. They were sophisticated temperature control devices that maintained a steady 32 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit or 0 to 4 degrees Celsius, nearly identical to your modern refrigerator. Root vegetables like turnips, carrots, and rutabagas were layered between sand and straw in these cellars, creating a natural crisper drawer that could keep vegetables fresh for months. A typical Viking root cellar could store enough vegetables to provide 2,000 to 2,500 calories per person per day throughout the winter. Grains posed another challenge entirely. Vikings learned that properly dried grain could last through winter without spoiling, but the drying process had to be perfect. Too much moisture meant mold. Too little meant the grain would be too hard to process. They built specialized drying racks that allowed them to control this process with remarkable precision, creating stores of grain that could last not just through winter, but sometimes for several years. Their version of a long-term emergency fund. The preservation process wasn't just about keeping food from spoiling. It was about maintaining enough nutritional diversity to keep people healthy through the dark months. Every preserved food item was part of a carefully planned nutritional strategy that provided proteins, carbohydrates, and enough vitamins to ward off deficiency diseases. Modern nutritionists have found that this preserved food diet, while monotonous by our standards, was surprisingly well balanced. Think of your home as a machine for keeping warm, and you'll begin to understand how Vikings approached shelter design. The longhouse wasn't just a building, it was a sophisticated environmental control system that would make modern sustainable architects nod in appreciation. These structures, typically measuring 50 to 80 feet or 15 to 24 meters in length, were masterpieces of thermal engineering disguised as simple wooden halls. The first surprise about longhouses was their roommates. If you think sharing a house with pets is intimate, Viking families lived with their entire livestock collection. Before you wrinkle your nose, consider the brilliance of this arrangement. A single cow produces roughly the same heat as a small modern space heater, about 1,000 BTUs per hour. A typical Viking longhouse might house 4 to 6 cows, several sheep, and other animals, essentially creating a living heating system that required no fuel beyond the feed they already needed to provide. The building's design maximized this heat capture through a principle modern architects call passive solar design. The long axis of the house typically ran east to west, with the main door facing south. This orientation allowed the low winter sun to penetrate deep into the building, while the steep pitched roof minimized heat loss. The roof design wasn't just about shedding snow. It created a thermal envelope that trapped rising warm air and radiated it back downward. But the real genius was in the walls. Vikings developed a sophisticated insulation system that would look familiar to modern green builders. The outer walls were typically built with a technique called skiftisverk, thick wooden planks fitted between vertical posts. Between these walls, they packed a dense layer of insulating material, moss, straw, and even sheep's wool. Modern testing of reconstructed walls shows they achieved an insulation value comparable to a modern home's fiberglass-filled walls. The central hearth was the heart of this indoor ecosystem. Unlike modern fireplaces that send most of their heat up the chimney, Viking hearths were designed for maximum heat retention. The smoke hole in the roof was carefully sized to maintain what we now call the stack effect, creating just enough draft to clear smoke while minimizing heat loss. The stone-lined hearth itself acted as a thermal mass, absorbing heat during the day and radiating it back at night, much like modern solar heat storage systems. The floor plan followed what we'd now call zoned heating. The central area around the hearth was the main living space, while storage areas were positioned at the cooler ends of the building. Sleeping platforms were typically raised and built along the walls, keeping people above the coldest air that settled at floor level. Perhaps most ingeniously, Vikings created what we might call the first airlock entries. Many longhouses had a small antechamber at the entrance, creating a buffer zone that prevented heat loss every time someone entered or left. This feature, which we now see in modern cold climate architecture, helped maintain the delicate thermal balance they worked so hard to achieve. Before Gore-Tex and synthetic fleece, Vikings had perfected a clothing system so effective that modern Arctic explorers still follow many of its principles. Their approach to cold weather clothing wasn't just about piling on layers, it was a sophisticated system that managed moisture, regulated temperature, and protected against wind while allowing enough mobility to work. The foundation of Viking cold weather wear was wool, but not the itchy sweater your grandmother knitted. Viking wool processing was a year-round task that produced a textile with properties that modern synthetics still struggle to match. Their sheep, smaller and hardier than modern breeds, produced two distinct types of wool: a soft, insulating undercoat and longer, water-resistant outer fibers. Through careful processing, Viking textile workers could create fabrics that combine the benefits of both. Imagine a natural version of modern two-layer ski gear. The Viking layering system would look familiar to any modern mountaineer. The base layer, or undertunics, were made from finely woven wool that wicks moisture away from the skin. Unlike modern polyester base layers that can get smelly, wool naturally resists bacterial growth. Tests on reconstructed Viking wool garments show they could absorb up to 30% of their weight in moisture without feeling wet, roughly twice what modern synthetic base layers can handle. The middle layer consisted of thicker wool garments, often including the iconic Viking wool tunic. These were designed with a loose weave that created thousands of tiny air pockets, the same principle used in modern fleece jackets. A typical middle layer tunic could trap enough air to provide insulation equivalent to a modern 200-weight fleece. The outer layer was where Viking ingenuity really shone. They created water-resistant cloaks using a technique called vadmal, a heavily fulled wool that was almost felt-like in density. These cloaks, often treated with animal fats for additional waterproofing, could shed snow and light rain while still allowing body moisture to escape. Modern tests show these cloaks perform similarly to mid-range modern shell jackets in terms of water resistance. As for their winter boots, they came with a clever trick: removable wool insoles. Dry them by the fire overnight, and you'd wake up to warm feet, ready for another brutal day. Their leg bindings? Strips of wool wrapped snug around the lower legs, adjustable for warmth and mobility, centuries ahead of modern gaiters. The most surprising aspect of Viking cold weather gear was its sophistication in handling the greatest challenge of winter clothing: managing moisture. Modern winter athletes know that sweat can be deadlier than cold. Once moisture freezes in your clothing, you're wearing an ice vest. Vikings solved this through careful garment design that included ventilation options. Their tunics often had front slits that could be opened during heavy work and closed for warmth during rest periods, the medieval equivalent of modern pit zips. The harsh reality was that no single household, no matter how well prepared, could guarantee their winter survival alone. The Vikings' greatest innovation wasn't in their tools or techniques. It was in their sophisticated social networks that turned individual vulnerability into collective resilience. The foundation of Viking winter survival was the Grannlag, neighborhood groups that functioned like ancient mutual aid societies. These weren't just informal arrangements, they were binding social contracts. Each household in a Grannlag had specific responsibilities and rights. Think of it as a medieval insurance policy where the premium was paid in labor and resources rather than money. Winter preparation began as a community effort long before the first frost. The Vikings had a system called dugnad, communal work days, where entire communities would gather to help each other prepare. Imagine your whole neighborhood showing up to help you stock your winter supplies, repair your roof, and ensure your heating system was ready. These weren't just helpful gestures, they were crucial survival strategies. A single household might take weeks to process their winter food stores, but a community working together could complete the task in days. The Vikings developed sophisticated food sharing systems that would impress modern economists. Each community maintained communal storage houses called burj, where surplus food was stored. These weren't just warehouses, they were carefully managed resources that could be drawn upon if a family's supplies ran low. The system wasn't charity, it was a complex web of obligations and rights that ensured everyone's survival. Despite the brutal conditions, entertainment was essential, a survival tactic often overlooked by historians. Long winter nights weren't just endured, they were filled with veternatter, gatherings that went far beyond mere celebration. These weren't just parties, they were lifelines. A time to share news, reinforce social bonds, and battle the crushing isolation of winter. Around the fire, stories were passed down, crucial skills were taught, and the wisdom of generations ensured that survival wasn't just physical, but psychological too. The community also maintained winter roads, packed snow paths between settlements that were literally kept open by a collective effort. Each household was responsible for maintaining their section of these paths, creating a transportation network that could mean the difference between life and death during emergencies. Most remarkably, these community systems were self-regulating. Social pressure and the harsh reality of winter created a culture where cooperation wasn't just encouraged, it was essential for survival. Households that failed to contribute to community efforts found themselves subtly excluded from social gatherings and support networks, creating a powerful incentive for participation. The Vikings didn't just survive winter, they mastered it. Their resilience wasn't just about tools, but about community, turning survival into an art form. In an age of climate challenges, their legacy reminds us, true strength comes from working together. Maybe it's time we learn from them.